You want to hear about our health and weight loss program? My name's Nick Howarth from Best Body Health Coach, and I'm here to tell you about why our program works and how it works. All right, so we all have bodies that we move around in life in, and we use these things to do certain things. And sometimes we feel that they hold us back. Sometimes we feel that they're really good. And we don't really understand how these things are affecting our daily life and how much better things could be. The first thing we do is we do an assessment on the person in front of us. So we find out how that person's endocrine system is doing. So that means the glandular system. And the glands are little fatty globules that produce hormones and communicate with one another through the use of hormones going through the bloodstream, and they will land up at another hormone or an organ, and that organ or hormone will carry out a command and then send a hormone back to the originator of that communication, which is the original gland. And at that point, the whole communication cycle is completed. But the problem with these little fatty globules is that they start to absorb toxins and then they become disrupted. And that means that they either start to communicate too much, in other words, they produce too much of a hormone, or they communicate too little, and they don't produce enough of that hormone, or they just don't communicate at all. So let's take an example of the female body. So when a female body is born, it's given a certain amount of eggs, and it goes through life up until about the age of 12 or 13 when that body goes into puberty. And it goes into puberty when there's a little gland in the brain that wakes up and sends a hormone out down to the ovaries through the bloodstream as a communication. And it commands those ovaries to release an egg. And then with that cycle, the girl goes through her menstrual cycle, and it's usually eventless, especially at a young age. But what starts to happen in life is there are certain disruptors that go into the system and then start to accumulate in these little fatty globules. So they accumulate in the ovaries, or they accumulate in this gland in the brain, and other glands as well that are in the body. And as a result of that, it causes these hormones to be produced in too high a volume or too low a volume by the gland. So the communication becomes either too much or too little, or just not at all. So now let's take the menstrual cycle. So now the hormone goes down to the ovaries, releases the egg, the ovaries release the hormone, goes back up to the brain, says, command has been carried out, everybody's happy, and the communication cycle is very sane and very smooth. But when these hormones get disrupted, then it starts to become a problem. Like especially when a female goes into menopause, because now this gland in the brain is still sending a command to release an egg, and there are no eggs left. So the body goes into this like psychotic communication cycle, and then the adrenal glands kick in. So then all sorts of things start to fall apart. Things may have fallen apart way earlier than that as well. Like for instance, if there are too many disruptors that have been collected in the ovaries, then you would find that the ovaries would start to develop cysts or fibroids, or you get this thing called PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and all sorts of things. And that can cause a horrible kind of menstrual cycle, where the girl gets migraines or terrible cramps that she's actually, has to lie in bed for a day, or she becomes infertile, or all sorts of things can happen when this whole cycle becomes disrupted. That makes a girl go through life having this problem of every 4 weeks, there's going to be an issue with her menstrual cycle. And it really is only because of diet and environmental factors, which can be reversed quite easily. The funny thing that you would find with a female like this is that she would have a specific kind of body shape. So the fat starts to accumulate around the area that has been disrupted. So you'll find that a girl who's carrying weight on her butt or on her hips, and a little tummy below her belly button, a big pair of thighs, and her upper body is disproportionately smaller than the lower part of the body. That would indicate that there's something going on with the ovaries which is not what we want. So another part of the endocrine system that could get disrupted is the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands would be disrupted through a loss that a person has taken in their life, a stressful job, a stressful childhood. It could be a loss of a loved one or even a pet, or just having someone who's toxic in your environment. And it causes these adrenal glands to produce a hormone called cortisol, which is needed in the body, but not in high amounts. So this gland starts to produce this cortisol in too high amounts. It's too much communication, if you want to put it that way. And what that starts to do is it starts to rob the body of protein. And it takes that protein and it turns it into fat or glucose, which turns into fat. And then it accumulates around the adrenal glands, which are disrupted. The adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys. So that's around about here. And it starts to put weight on around the midriff. So you would have a flabby, pendulous belly that starts to form. So not a hard belly that stands out like a watermelon. It would be more of a flabby belly that hangs over your belt. You would also develop what we call passion handles or love handles, and you'd get this like proverbial spare tire around the waist. And that's an indicator that there's something going on with the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are also the glands that will make you wake up suddenly at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and then start worrying about needless things. The other thing that could happen is the thyroid gland could slow down. And if the thyroid glands slow down, the thyroid regulates metabolism. So now, if your thyroid gland slowed down, it's obvious that you would then have a slowed down metabolism. So that means you start putting on weight all over the body. So firstly, you'll start developing a double chin, and then you will start putting on weight all over the body. The problem with the thyroid gland and fat accumulation is that it is a certain kind of fat that starts to accumulate over the body. So it's like water and fat that's been mixed up and become like a sticky sludge, and it lodges itself between the cells in the body, and it becomes very, very difficult to lose unless you start handling your thyroid gland. And you don't really want to have that thing removed. There are ways of sorting it out. So you have all these different issues that can go on with the body as far as the endocrine system goes. Part of the endocrine system is the liver. Now, a lot of people say it's an organ, and it absolutely is, but it is actually also considered as part of the endocrine system because it converts different kinds of hormones. It has so many functions, and it's a wonderful organ. And when it is disrupted or damaged, it's the only organ in the body that can repair itself back to 100% functionality. So all you need is about 25% of it left to work with, and that liver will fix itself up. So you need to strip your fat off your liver so that it's working properly and get that liver flowing properly, which then brings us into the gallbladder. And if your gallbladder is not working properly, then it starts having trouble with your digestive system. If your digestive system is not working properly, then you're going to start having trouble with immune properties and all those kinds of things as well. So it's this whole domino effect when the liver gets compromised. So this brings us to the next hormone, which is probably one of the biggest factors in the body, with anybody's body. I mean, you have female bodies and you have male bodies, and they have their different kinds of hormones that can cause havoc in their different bodies. But the one hormone that causes havoc in everybody's body is insulin. So here's the deal with insulin. Every time you eat anything, whether it's sugar, carbs, fat, protein, it doesn't matter. The pancreas senses that something has been eaten and that there's glucose being produced that is going into the blood. So usually when a person is on a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, or even a high protein diet for that matter, the liver turns it into glucose, and there are excess glucose in the blood. The insulin then comes along and removes that excess glucose. So the pancreas has to create enough insulin to remove that excess glucose. The other important function that insulin has in the body is it is like a key that opens up the lock on the cell, or the door on the cell. So it opens that cell up so that it can accept nutrients into it. Now the problem comes in when your insulin levels are too high because your glucose levels are too high, because the insulin is trying to remove the excess glucose from your blood because the person is eating too many carbohydrates or too much sugar. Then the cells become inflamed from too much insulin, and they start to get damaged from too much insulin. So these little cells are little organisms on their own, little individual organisms that have a survival content of their own. And they go, hang on a sec, this insulin thing is damaging us. We're going to shut down to it. We're not going to accept this insulin anymore. So they become resistant to insulin. That's where insulin resistance comes in. And this starts off probably 15 years before the person even gets diagnosed with diabetes type 2. So now, what we can extrapolate from that is that these cells are not being opened up to nutrients, which means you're not getting nutrients into the cell because the cell is not allowing insulin. So now you start starving. So what does it do with those nutrients? It turns it to fat, and you start accumulating fat all over the body. So in other words, you're putting on weight, but you're starving. So you remain hungry. And the more hungry you are, the more you eat, the more your pancreas creates insulin, the more resistant your cells become to insulin. So what our job is at Best Body Health Coaching is to bring those glucose levels down into an acceptable range, keep them there stably, so that your insulin levels eventually synchronize and also go down into a stable range, and the cells go, oh, hang on a sec, these things are not as dangerous as they were before. We can now open up again to insulin, which is what we call insulin sensitive, which is the opposite of insulin resistance. So now the cells open up, and because on our program, we are feeding you densely nutritious food, that's what's going into the cells, and the cells start to regenerate and rebuild on this densely nutritious food. Then you also have the system of how the cells die off and new cells are created in the body. So now what happens is you have different cells throughout the body. You have bone cells, skin cells, brain cells, liver cells, all of these different kinds of cells. And they are going to rebuild themselves on whatever food you're eating. So if you're eating burgers, French fries, cakes, donuts, GMO foods specifically, that's what your cells are going to start building themselves on. So when these things are harming these new cells that are being built, that's when you start getting things like cancer. So these cells become disrupted, and they aberrate, and they grow in a very funny way, and they're not a normal cell. So you don't want to be feeding your body that. You want your body to start growing and building on the really good stuff, like the vegetables and the moderate protein and the good fats and oils. So that's what we do on our program, is we get your cells to become insulin sensitive so that they open up and they accept those nutrients, those really densely nutritious nutrients, and the body starts to recover. So all sorts of body issues start to recover at that point. And it's just like there are so many body issues that can come up because of a disrupted endocrine system, because of too much insulin and too much glucose, because of a high carbohydrate, high sugar, high GMO, high toxin diet, that it's just too many to mention. But we have the most amazing things that happen when we start feeding the body the correct stuff. And that's what our program is all about in a nutshell. So if you want to know more about our program, you can download our app. The links will be below. It's called Health Track Me. You can do a free assessment on that app. You can also go visit our website. The link for that is also below, and check out our social media. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And we'd be very happy to help you and do a free consultation with you after you've done the assessment on our app. And we'd really like to see you on the program. Our purpose for this program is to make man healthy again, and to give him the knowledge on how to stay healthy and get through life happy and with a lot of longevity.